Silver burns. It doesn't just cut, it sears the flesh like a branding iron left in the fire too long. Gianna Mercer didn't know this when she picked up the bolt cutters. She didn't know that the massive, snarling creature chained in the dark of the Vane estate wasn't a dog or a monster, but a king waiting for his crown. She only knew that the whimper coming from the shadows broke her heart. But kindness is a dangerous thing in a world of predators. She broke the chains, and in doing so, she didn't just free a wolf, she unleashed a war. And the moment those silver links hit the floor, she belonged to him. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light piercing the gloom of the cellar. It smelled of wet earth, copper, and something older, something musky and wild. Gianna Mercer adjusted the strap of her heavy canvas apron and wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek. As a freelance archivist, she was used to damp basements and forgotten family secrets. But the Vane estate was different. It felt alive, and not in a welcoming way. Victor Vane, the estate's owner, had hired her to catalog the historical artifacts in the lower levels before the property went up for auction. He was a slippery man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He had explicitly forbidden her from entering the north cellar, claiming it was structurally unsound. Curiosity, however, was Gianna's professional hazard. She stood before the heavy iron door of the north cellar. The padlock was new, gleaming brass against the rusted iron. That was the first inconsistency. Why put a new lock on a room that was about to collapse? A sound drifted through the heavy wood, a low, guttural whimper that sounded painfully human. Gianna froze. She pressed her ear to the wood. The sound came again, followed by the clinking of heavy chains. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. Silence answered her, heavy and oppressive. Then, a sudden thud against the door made her jump back. She shouldn't be here. She needed to go back upstairs, finish the inventory of the library, and collect her check. But the sound of suffering was impossible to ignore. Gianna reached into her tool bag and pulled out the heavy-duty bolt cutters she used for rusted storage lockers. With a deep breath, she clamped the jaws around the padlock. It took all her weight, leaning into the leverage until snap. The lock fell. The door groaned open on reluctant hinges. The smell hit her first. It was the scent of raw meat and infection. She clicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. In the center of the room, bolted to the stone floor, was a cage, and inside the cage was the largest wolf she had ever seen. Its fur was matted with blood and filth, a midnight black that seemed to absorb the light. But it was the size that terrified her. The creature's head was massive, its paws the size of dinner plates. Thick, glistening chains were wrapped around its neck and paws. Where the metal touched the fur, the skin was blistered and raw. Smoke rose faintly from the contact points. "My God," Gianna whispered, her hand covering her mouth. The wolf lifted its head. Its eyes were not the eyes of an animal. They were a piercing, electric blue, intelligent, agonized, and furious. It snarled, a rumble that vibrated in Gianna's chest. But it didn't lunge. It couldn't. The chains were pulled so tight the creature could barely lay its head down. Gianna took a step forward. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, realizing how ridiculous she sounded talking to a wolf. The wolf watched her. It didn't blink. It seemed to be assessing her, judging her soul in the span of a heartbeat. She saw the source of the smoke. The chains were silver. She remembered the old folklore her grandmother used to tell her about the supernatural, stories she had dismissed as fairy tales. "Silver burns the wicked," her grandmother had said. But this creature didn't look wicked. It looked tortured. "Victor did this to you," she realized aloud. The wolf's lip curled at the name, a low growl tearing from its throat. Gianna made a choice. It was a choice that would cost her her job, her safety, and her normal life. She stepped into the cage, the bolt cutters heavy in her hands. The wolf tensed. It could snap her neck in a second, injured or not. But it remained still, watching the tool in her hands. "This is going to be loud," she warned softly. She knelt by the creature's massive front paw. The heat radiating from its body was intense, like a furnace. Up close, the damage was horrific. The silver had eaten into the muscle. Gianna fit the jaws of the cutter around the chain link. She squeezed. The metal was thick. She gritted her teeth, putting her entire body weight behind the handles. Her shoulders burned, her knuckles turned white. "Come on," she hissed. With a sharp crack, the link gave way. The wolf flinched, then let out a breath that sounded like a sigh. Gianna didn't stop. She moved to the other paw. Snap. Then the back legs. Snap. Snap. Finally, she stood up and moved to the heavy collar around its neck. This was the most dangerous part. Her throat was inches from its jaws. The wolf looked up at her. For a second, the electric blue eyes softened. It nudged her hand with its wet nose, a gesture of unexpected gentleness. "I've got you," she whispered. She clamped the cutters on the collar's lock. She strained, her muscles trembling. It wouldn't budge. She readjusted her grip, sweat stinging her eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" The voice came from the doorway. Cold, aristocratic, terrifying. Gianna spun around. Victor Vane stood there, holding a hunting rifle. Beside him were two men she didn't recognize, built like linebackers with dead eyes. "Get away from the beast, Miss Mercer," Victor said, racking the bolt of the rifle. Gianna didn't move away. She instinctively stepped in front of the wolf, shielding its head with her body. "You're torturing it. This is illegal. I'm calling the police." Victor laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Police? You think the police handle things like this? That isn't a dog, you stupid girl. That is a weapon. And you just ruined months of conditioning." He raised the rifle, aiming not at the wolf, but at Gianna. "A shame," Victor sighed. "Good archivists are hard to find." The gunshot was deafening in the small stone room. Gianna flinched, waiting for the pain, but it never came. Because the chains were gone, a blur of black fur exploded past her. The wolf moved with a speed that defied physics. It was a shadow made of teeth and rage. Before Victor could cycle the next round, the wolf was on him. The violence was absolute. Gianna fell back against the stone wall, shielding her face as the room erupted into chaos. The two bodyguards drew handguns, but they were too slow. The wolf, no. This was a monster of war, tore through them with terrifying efficiency. It wasn't just biting. It was dismantling them. Victor screamed as the rifle was knocked from his hands. The wolf pinned him to the ground, its massive jaws hovering over Victor's throat. "Wait!" Gianna screamed. The command tore out of her throat before she could stop it. The wolf froze. It didn't turn to look at her, but its ears swiveled back. It was breathing heavily, blood not its own, dripping from its muzzle. "Don't kill him," she said, her voice shaking. "If you kill him, you're just what he says you are." The wolf looked down at Victor, who was sobbing, pale and broken on the floor. The beast snarled, a sound of pure disgust, and then clamped its jaws around Victor's arm, snapping the bone with a sickening crunch, but leaving his throat intact. Victor passed out from the pain. The room fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the wolf and the distant drip of water. Gianna slid down the wall, her legs giving out. "Oh God! Oh my God!" The massive black wolf turned toward her. The rage in its eyes faded, replaced by that intense, calculating blue. It walked toward her, its steps heavy but silent. Gianna pressed herself into the corner. I helped you." The wolf stopped inches from her. Slowly, the air in the room began to shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer. The sound of cracking bones filled the space, not the wet snap of injury, but the grinding, restructuring sound of biology, rewriting itself. Gianna squeezed her eyes shut. When the noise stopped, a voice spoke. It was deep, rough like gravel, and commanded immediate obedience. "Open your eyes, Gianna." She opened them. The wolf was gone. In its place knelt a man. He was naked, covered in blood and grime, but the sheer power radiating from him made the nudity irrelevant. He was huge, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders corded with muscle. His hair was as black as the wolf's fur, hanging in messy strands over his eyes. Those eyes the same electric blue bored into hers. He reached out a hand. His knuckles were bruised, his wrists scarred from the silver. "You should have run," he said. "Why didn't you run?" "I couldn't leave you," she whispered. He stared at her, a mixture of confusion and awe on his face. He leaned in, inhaling the scent at the crook of her neck. A shiver violently shook his frame. "Mine," he growled, the word sounding less like English and more like a decree from a god. "What?" Gianna stammered. "The chains," he said, his voice straining. "The silver, it suppresses the wolf. But it also suppresses the bond, now that it's gone." He looked at her with a hunger that terrified and thrilled her. "I am Ricky Valco. And you, Gianna Mercer, have just saved the Alpha of the Blood River Pack." Gianna blinked. "Werewolves. You're talking about werewolves." I am talking about survival," Ricky said. He stood up, unashamed of his state, and grabbed a dusty tarp from a shelf, wrapping it around his waist. "Victor isn't working alone. He's a broker. He was selling me. The buyers will be here within the hour. We need to move." "We?" Gianna asked, scrambling to her feet. "I'm going to my car and driving to the nearest police station." Ricky grabbed her arm. His grip was iron tight but careful not to bruise. "You are marked now. Your scent is all over me, and mine is all over you. If you leave, Victor's buyers, the Grave Syndicate, will hunt you down just to get to me. You are involved, whether you like it or not." Gianna looked at the carnage in the room. She looked at the man who radiated danger. She realized he was right. Her normal life had ended the moment she cut that lock. "Where do we go?" she asked. Ricky's eyes flashed. "To take back my kingdom." Suddenly, he winced, clutching his side. The silver burns were deep. He swayed. "You're hurt," Gianna said, her nurse instincts overriding her fear. She grabbed his arm to steady him. "I need moonlight," Ricky rasped. "And I need distance. I need. They stumbled out of the cellar and up the stairs. The manor was quiet, but sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had heard the shots. "My car," Gianna said. "It's an old Volvo, but it runs." They burst out into the cool, rainy night of the Pacific Northwest. The rain hissed against Ricky's fever-hot skin. He looked up at the moon, which was barely visible behind the clouds, and seemed to draw strength from it. As they reached her car, headlights swept across the long driveway. 3 black SUVs were tearing up the gravel, boxing them in. "The buyers," Ricky growled. He pushed Gianna behind him. "Get in the car. Start it." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to buy you time." "No!" Gianna screamed. "Get in!" Ricky looked at her, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a feral, dangerous smile. A Luna who gives orders. I like that. He dove into the passenger seat just as bullets began to ping off the gravel. Gianna slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud, and floored it. She swerved around the lead SUV, clipping its bumper, and roared down the driveway. "Go left," Ricky barked. "Into the woods. The main road is a trap." Gianna hauled the wheel to the left, crashing through a wooden fence and bouncing onto an old logging road. The Volvo groaned but kept moving. Behind them, the SUVs turned to follow. The hunt was on. They drove for 3 hours in silence, navigating twisting logging roads that Gianna didn't know existed. Ricky gave directions with uncanny precision, his eyes closed, navigating by scent and memory. They finally emerged onto a paved highway near the Canadian border. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, shaking shock. Gianna pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Motor Inn, a dilapidated motel with a flickering neon sign. "This looks charming," she muttered. her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her fingers ached. "It has no cameras," Ricky said, opening his eyes. "And the owner owes me a favor." They checked in. The night clerk, an old man with a cloudy eye, didn't even blink at Ricky's lack of shirt or the tarp wrapped around his waist. He simply handed over a key. Room 4. "Good to see you breathing, Ricky." "Barely, Saul," Ricky grunted. Inside the room, the smell of stale cigarettes and pine cleaner was overwhelming. Ricky collapsed onto the bed, the tarp falling away. Gianna locked the door and engaged the chain. She turned to look at him. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the motel room, his injuries looked worse. The silver burns were black and oozing. "I have a first aid kit in the car," she said, "and I have some leftover antibiotics from a vet visit for my cat." "Antibiotics won't help," Ricky gritted out. "It's silver poisoning. It stops my healing factor." Gianna went to the bathroom, wet a towel with cold water, and came back. She sat on the edge of the bed. "This is going to hurt." "I know." As she dabbed at the wounds on his chest, Ricky watched her. The intensity of his gaze made her hands tremble. "Why were you there, Gianna?" he asked softly. "At the manor? I'm a historian, an archivist. I specialize in the history of the founding families of Washington State." Ricky let out a dry laugh. "Founding families. That's a polite way of saying warlords. The Vanes have been hunting my kind for a century." "I didn't know," she said. "I swear." "I believe you." He reached up and caught her hand. His skin was scorching hot. "You have a calming scent, lavender and old paper. It quiets the wolf." Gianna tried to pull her hand away, but she didn't want to. A strange warmth was spreading up her arm from where he touched her. "You said something back there. About a bond. About a Luna." Ricky sat up, wincing. "In our world, there are alphas and there are their mates. The Luna is the equal to the alpha. She is his anchor. Without her, an alpha eventually loses his mind to the wolf." "And you think I'm that?" "I don't think. I know." Ricky looked deep into her eyes. "When you touched the silver, you should have been repulsed. The magic in those chains is designed to terrify humans, but you broke them. You defied an instinct of self-preservation to save a monster. Only a mate does that." Gianna stood up, pacing the small room. "This is insane. I'm a human. I do yoga on Tuesdays. I pay taxes. I don't do wolf kingdoms." "You are part of this now," Ricky said, his voice hardening. "Victor Vane works for Lucian Graves. Graves is a rogue alpha who usurped my throne 3 months ago. He killed my father. He chained me in that basement to break me, to make me sign over the territory rights before killing me." He stood up, towering over her. "Graves thinks I'm dead or broken. He doesn't know I have you." "What good am I?" Gianna cried. "I have a degree in history, not combat." Ricky stepped closer, trapping her against the dresser. He lowered his head so his lips brushed her ear. "Lucian Graves rules by fear, but the pack law, the old laws, they are written in blood and history. You know history, Gianna. You can find the loophole that Graves missed. You are not just a nursemaid. You are the weapon I need to take back my pack without slaughtering half of them." Gianna's breath hitched. "And if I help you? If I help you get your crown back? Then you rule beside me," Ricky promised, "as my queen." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with static. Ricky leaned in, his lips hovering inches from hers. The pull was magnetic, undeniable. Gianna felt a longing she couldn't explain, a need to be close to him, to comfort him, to let him claim her. Suddenly, the room window shattered. A canister smashed onto the floor, hissing as it spun. "Gas!" Ricky roared. He grabbed Gianna, throwing her into the bathroom and slamming the door just as white smoke filled the bedroom. He kicked the bathroom window out, glass raining into the alleyway behind the motel. "Go!" he shouted, lifting her up and pushing her through the window. Gianna tumbled onto the wet asphalt outside. Ricky followed, landing like a cat. "They found us," Gianna coughed, eyes streaming. How did they find us? Ricky looked at her, his expression dark. He reached out and ripped the small silver necklace she always wore from her neck. He crushed the pendant in his hand. Inside was a tiny, blinking red light. A tracker, he spat. Victor didn't just hire you to catalog artifacts, Gianna. He hired you to be the bait. Gianna stared at the crushed jewelry in horror. It had been a gift from Victor when she took the job, a welcome to the team gesture. I didn't know, she sobbed. Run, Ricky commanded, grabbing her hand. Around the corner of the motel, shadows detached themselves from the darkness. Men with glowing yellow eyes, wolves in human skin. Well, a voice sneered from the darkness. A man stepped forward, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Gianna's life. He had slicked back blonde hair and a smile that was all teeth. Lucian, Ricky growled, stepping in front of Gianna. Hello, cousin, Lucian Graves said. I see you found yourself a pet. She's pretty. I think I'll keep her after I peel the skin from your bones. Ricky's body began to crack and shift. Run, Gianna, he snarled, his voice distorting into the wolf's growl. Run, and don't look back. Ricky exploded into his wolf form, charging the 5 men surrounding them. But Gianna didn't run. Her eyes darted to the fire escape ladder hanging 3 feet above her head. She looked at the dumpster nearby. History, Ricky had said. You know history. She remembered reading about the weakness of the Graves bloodline in the Vane archives. They were arrogant. They liked to play with their food. She scrambled up the dumpster and leaped for the ladder, hauling herself up to the roof. She wasn't leaving him. She was getting the high ground. Rain lashed against the rooftop of the Starlight Motor Inn, slicking the tar paper and soaking Gianna to the bone. Below, the alleyway was a chaotic swirl of violence. Ricky was fighting for his life. In his wolf form, Ricky was a juggernaut of black fur and muscle, but the odds were impossible. Lucian Graves had brought 5 enforcers, massive timber wolves that circled Ricky with practiced coordination. They snapped at his hamstrings, tearing open the silver-burned flesh that hadn't yet healed. Gianna watched, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt useless. She was a woman with a history degree, not a soldier. But as she gripped the cold, rusted metal of the roof's edge, she remembered the layout of the motel. She had seen the junction box on the side of the building when they arrived, an old, sparking monstrosity that hummed with too much voltage. The alley was flooding with rainwater. The wolves were standing in ankle-deep puddles. Gianna scrambled across the roof, her sneakers slipping on the wet tar. She found the heavy power cable running from the main pole to the junction box. It was thick, insulated, and heavy. Hey! She screamed, her voice cracking over the sound of the rain and snarling wolves. Below, Lucian looked up. He was still in human form, watching the slaughter with a bored expression. Come down, darling. Don't make me climb up there. I'm not coming down, she yelled, and you're not coming up. She grabbed a loose brick from the crumbling chimney and smashed it against the rusted bracket holding the power cable to the roof. It didn't budge. Ricky let out a pained yelp below. One of the wolves had clamped onto his neck. Panic flared in Gianna's chest. She raised the brick and brought it down again with everything she had. Smash! Sparks flew. The bracket snapped. The heavy live cable whipped free. Ricky, move! She screamed, praying he could hear her human voice through the wolf's rage. Ricky didn't look up, but his ears swiveled. Instinct took over. He bucked the wolf off his back and leaped backward, crashing through the rotting wooden fence and out of the puddle. Gianna kicked the cable off the roof. The live wire, sparking and hissing like a serpent, fell directly into the flooded alleyway where Lucian's enforcers stood. The effect was instantaneous. The water conducted the electricity, arcing blue light through the wolves. They convulsed, yelping in agony as thousands of volts seized their muscles. Lucian, standing on the dry concrete of the loading dock, leaped back, his face twisting in shock. You witch! Lucian roared, looking up at her. Run! Gianna scrambled back down the fire escape on the opposite side of the building, sliding down the ladder and dropping into the mud. Ricky was waiting for her. He had shifted back to human form, a painful, quick transition born of necessity. He was leaning heavily against the brick wall, naked and shivering, blood streaming from a dozen bites. That was, he wheezed, reckless. That was physics, she panted, grabbing his arm and hauling him toward the road. We need a car. They found an old pickup truck idling near the maintenance shed. The keys were in the ignition. The cleaner had left it running to warm up. Gianna didn't hesitate. She shoved Ricky into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. They peeled out of the lot just as Lucian's screams of rage echoed into the night. They drove for an hour, putting distance between themselves and the motel. Ricky was fading fast. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow. The silver poisoning was spreading, exacerbated by the fresh wounds and the forced transformation. I need to take you to a hospital, Gianna said, gripping the wheel. No, Ricky rasped, his eyes closed. Doctors report gunshot wounds. Graves owns the police. In this county. He'll find us. Then where? You're dying, Ricky. Tears pricked her eyes. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Oland, he whispered. Go to. Whisper Ridge. The old fire watchtower. Who is Oland? The Pax. Keeper of lore. He was exiled by Lucian. He won't turn us in. The drive up to Whisper Ridge was treacherous. The truck skidded on mud tracks that were barely roads. By the time they reached the base of the fire tower, the sun was beginning to bleed gray light over the horizon. Gianna half-carried, half-dragged Ricky up the wooden stairs. She pounded on the door. Open up! Please! The door swung open. A man stood there, or what looked like a bear of a man. He had a thick white beard, skin like leather, and he was holding a shotgun. Give me one reason not to shoot you, trespasser, the old man grumbled. Ricky Valco is dying on your porch, Gianna said, her voice steel. The old man's eyes widened. He looked down at the unconscious man in Gianna's arms. By the moon, he cursed, dropping the gun and rushing forward to grab Ricky. Get him inside. Quickly. Inside, the tower was warm, filled with the scent of drying herbs and wood smoke. Oland laid Ricky on a cot and immediately began working, applying foul-smelling poultices to the wounds. He's full of silver, Oland muttered, his hands moving with surprising delicacy. And he's been fighting. He looked at Gianna. Who are you? I'm the one who broke him out, she said, collapsing into a chair. Oland paused. He looked at her, really looked at her, sniffing the air. A slow smile spread across his face. Well. The boy finally found her. Found who? His Luna, Oland chuckled. Only a Luna's touch can soothe silver burn like this. If you weren't his mate, he'd be dead already. Gianna looked at Ricky's pale face. He said that. He said I'm his mate. But I don't understand how. I just met him. The soul doesn't care about time, girl, Oland said, crushing herbs into a bowl. The soul knows what it needs. 2 days passed in the isolation of the fire tower. Outside, a storm raged, masking their scent from Lucian's trackers. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. Ricky's fever broke on the second night. He woke up weak but lucid. When he saw Gianna sleeping in the chair next to his cot, her hand resting on his arm, the tension left his body. He watched her for an hour, memorizing the curve of her face, the way her breathing hitched. When she finally woke, his blue eyes were the first thing she saw. You stayed, he said softly. I seem to be making a habit of it, she smiled, stretching her stiff back. Ricky sat up, the sheet falling to his waist. His wounds were pink scars now, healing at a supernatural rate thanks to Oland's care and the proximity of his mate. We need to talk about what happens next. Oland walked in from the small kitchenette, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. What happens next is you die, boy. Unless you have an army hidden in your pocket. Lucian has the pack. He has the territory. He doesn't have the claim, Gianna said suddenly. Both men looked at her. I've been thinking about what I read in the Vane archives, she continued, standing up. Victor Vane kept detailed records of his enemies. He had a copy of the Codex Lupine, your laws. The Codex is ancient, Ricky said. Nobody follows the letter of it anymore. But the council does, Gianna countered. I read the section on succession. A challenge for the Alpha title must be witnessed by 3 blood members of the pack. If an Alpha is murdered in secret, the killer is not the Alpha. He is a kinslayer. Lucian killed my father in his sleep, Ricky said, his fists clenching. But there's no proof. He claims my father died of a heart attack and named him successor. There is proof, Gianna said. Or there should be. The Codex says that when an Alpha dies, the pack stone, the obsidian rock in the council hall, records the nature of the death. If it was natural, the stone stays black. If it was murder by a pack member, the stone turns red. Ooh. Ricky looked at Oland. The old man nodded slowly. She's right. It's an old magic, forgotten by most. But the stone of truth sits in the atrium of the Blackwood Hall. If we can get into the hall, Ricky said, a plan forming in his eyes, and show the council the stone, then Lucian is stripped of his protection, Oland finished. The pack bond will break. He will be just a man alone against a pack he betrayed. It's a suicide mission, Ricky said, looking at Gianna. We have to walk right into the heart of his power. We, Gianna repeated. No, Ricky shook his head. Not you. I can't risk you. Gianna walked over to the cot. She placed her hands on his bare chest, right over his heart. She could feel the steady, powerful thrum of it. You said, I am your Luna. That means I am your strength. You can't do this without me, Ricky, and I won't let you go alone. The air in the cabin shifted. The connection between them flared, hot and consuming. Ricky reached up and cupped her face. If we do this, if we survive, there is no going back. You will be bound to me, to the wolf, forever. I broke the chains, Ricky, she whispered, leaning down. I'm not looking for new ones, but I am looking for you. He pulled her down. The kiss was searing, a desperate collision of souls. It wasn't gentle. It was a promise of war and devotion. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. There was only the heat of his skin, the taste of him, and the undeniable truth that she belonged here, with this dangerous, broken king. When they broke apart, Ricky's eyes were glowing a faint, luminous blue. Then let's go take back our kingdom, he growled. The Black River estate loomed against the night sky, a fortress of stone and timber nestled deep in the valley. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and terrible secrets. Tonight it was lit up like a beacon, the golden glow from its arched windows spilling out onto the wet, manicured lawns. Lucian Graves was hosting a gala, a lavish display of wealth and power intended to solidify his rule over the neighboring territories. Carriages and luxury cars lined the driveway. Music drifted on the wind, masking the tension that gripped the land. It was the perfect stage for a coup. Ricky, Gianna, and Oland had left the truck a mile out, navigating the dense, rain-slicked forest on foot to avoid the patrols. The storm that had shielded them at the tower was fading, leaving behind a heavy, mist-laden silence. Waiting at the perimeter, hidden in the shadows of the towering pines, were the Loyalists. There were only 12 of them, gray-muzzled veterans and young wolves whose families had suffered under Lucian's cruelty. They looked at Ricky not just with respect, but with a desperate hope. 12 against 100, Olin grunted, checking the action on his shotgun, though he knew bullets would do little against shifters tonight. I've seen worse odds, but I can't remember when. Ricky adjusted the cuffs of the suit he had borrowed from one of the Loyalists. It was tight across his broad shoulders, the fabric straining against muscles coiled for violence. He looked at the small band of rebels. It's not about numbers, Ricky told them, his voice low but carrying the undeniable resonance of the Alpha. It's about the truth. Lucian rules by fear and lies. We strip him of the lie, and the fear will turn to anger. We just need to get to the atrium. He turned to Gianna. She was wearing a black silk dress scavenged from Olin's late wife's closet. It was dated, the style belonging to a different era, but on her, it looked timeless. With her hair swept back and her jaw set, she didn't look like an archivist. She looked like a queen returning from exile. "Ready?" Ricky asked, offering her his hand. His skin was warm, the fever gone, replaced by a vibrating energy. "Ready," she lied. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she took his hand. She was terrified, but looking at him at the fierce determination in his blue eyes, she knew she would follow him into hell if he asked. They didn't sneak in through the servants' entrance. They didn't climb the trellises. They walked straight up the gravel driveway, the crunch of their footsteps rhythmic and purposeful. The guards at the main entrance were so stunned to see the dead prince walking out of the mist that they didn't even raise their weapons before the loyalists disarmed them. Ricky kicked the heavy oak doors. They boomed open, slamming against the interior stone walls with a sound like a cannon shot. The grand ballroom froze. 300 guests, alphas, emissaries, and high-ranking pack members turned in unison. The string quartet screeched to a halt. The laughter died. The only sound was the rain dripping from Ricky's coat onto the marble floor. Ricky Valco strode into the room, Gianna on his arm. He didn't look like a prisoner. He didn't look like a victim. He radiated a suffocating aura of dominance that made the weaker wolves in the room instinctively lower their heads, their inner beasts cowed by the presence of a true king. Lucian stood at the top of the grand double staircase, a crystal champagne flute in his hand. He was laughing at a joke, but as his eyes locked onto Ricky, the laughter died in his throat. For a second, pure, unadulterated fear flashed across his face. Then, the mask of the politician slammed back into place. "A ghost," Lucian sneered, though his voice was brittle, echoing too loudly in the cavernous space. "I didn't know the dead were invited to parties. Guard, remove this trash." Half a dozen enforcers stepped forward, growling low in their throats. "Stand down!" The voice didn't come from Ricky. It rang out clear and sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Gianna stepped forward, leaving Ricky's side. She stood alone in the center of the room, under the massive crystal chandelier. "I invoke the challenge of the stone," she declared. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Murmurs broke out among the visiting alphas. The challenge of the stone. It was an archaic law, a piece of history that most had forgotten but Gianna hadn't. Lucian gripped the railing of the balcony until his knuckles turned white. "She is human," he spat, his composure cracking. "She has no voice here. She is meat." "She is my mate," Ricky roared. The sound wasn't human. It was a thunderclap that shook the glass in the windows. His control slipped, his eyes flashing a luminous, electric blue. A low growl rippled through the room, not from him, but from the gathered guests. To deny a mate was the gravest insult in their culture. "Show us the stone, Lucian," Ricky challenged, stepping up beside her, his presence shielding her. "If my father died of natural causes, as you claim, the obsidian in the atrium is black. But if it is red, then you are a kinslayer. And by the laws of every pack in this room, a kinslayer has no rights, no title, no protection." Lucian's eyes darted involuntarily to the heavy red velvet curtains behind him on the landing, the entrance to the atrium. He knew. The guests saw his glance, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. Doubt began to curdle into suspicion. "Kill them!" Lucian screamed, his face twisting into a mask of rage. "Kill them all! Anyone who stands with them dies!" The guards surged forward. "Now!" Ricky shouted. The 12 loyalists burst from the crowd, shifting into wolves mid-air. The sound of tearing fabric and cracking bones filled the hall. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed and scrambled for the exits, overturning tables and shattering crystal. Ricky didn't wait. He embraced the shift. The massive black wolf exploded from his human form, a blur of shadow and fury. He tore through the first line of guards, not stopping to kill, just clearing a path. He was a battering ram of muscle and teeth. "Janna, go," the voice echoed in her skull, a direct mind link. It was a sensation that made her gasp, intimate and overwhelming. She didn't hesitate. She hiked up the heavy silk of her dress and ran for the stairs. Lucian saw her coming. With a snarl of hatred, he shed his human skin. His form twisted and cracked, expanding into a monstrous, golden-furred wolf. He was larger than natural, bloated on steroids and dark magic, his eyes glowing with madness. He ignored Ricky. He lunged for Gianna. She slid across the polished floor, barely dodging the snapping jaws that were large enough to crush her skull. She wasn't trying to fight him. She was trying to get to the curtains. Ricky intercepted. The black wolf collided with the golden one in mid-air with a sickening crunch. They hit the stairs, a tangled ball of fur and teeth, rolling down and crashing into the decorative fountain at the base. Water sprayed everywhere, mixing with blood. Gianna scrambled up the remaining stairs, her breath tearing at her lungs. A guard, loyal to Lucian, grabbed her ankle. "You're not going anywhere, bitch," he snarled. Adrenaline flooded her system. She wasn't a warrior, but she was desperate. She kicked backward with all her might, driving the sharp heel of her shoe into the guard's eye. He screamed and let go. She clawed her way up the railing, pulling herself onto the landing. Below, the fight was brutal. Ricky was holding his own, but Lucian was unnaturally strong, his claws tearing into Ricky's shoulder. Gianna reached the velvet curtains. They were heavy, weighing hundreds of pounds. She grabbed the thick gold tassel and pulled, putting her entire body weight into the motion. "Look!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Look at the truth!" The curtain rod groaned, and then the fabric fell away. Behind them, resting on a pedestal of pristine white marble, sat the Packstone. It was not black. It was not gray. It was a deep, pulsating crimson. It glowed with an inner light, the color of fresh arterial blood. It was the mark of murder, the mark of Cain. Silence rippled outward from the landing, spreading like a shockwave. The fighting below slowed, then stopped. The guards froze. The visiting alphas stared. The evidence was irrefutable. It was magical law, woven into the very foundation of the estate. Ricky stood over Lucian, his jaws clamped around the usurper's throat. Lucian was struggling, thrashing in the water, but the fight had gone out of his men. They saw the stone. They saw the lie they had been serving. Gianna stood by the stone, her chest heaving, her hair wild, her dress torn. She pointed a trembling finger down at the golden wolf. "He killed his alpha," she shouted into the silence. "He has no honor. He has no pack." The gods who had been protecting Lucian backed away. They lowered their weapons. They lowered their heads in shame. Lucian shifted back to human form, naked and defeated beneath Ricky's paws. He looked up, coughing water and blood. "It doesn't matter," he wheezed, a grotesque smile on his lips. "I sold the Northern Territory. The contracts are signed. You inherit nothing but ruin." Ricky shifted back. He stood tall, ignoring the blood dripping from his own wounds. He looked down at his cousin not with rage, but with cold, absolute pity. "I don't care about the land," Ricky said, his voice echoing in the silent hall. "I care about the people." He looked up at the balcony. He looked at Gianna. "And I have my queen." Ricky looked around the room at the council members and the guards. His eyes were hard as flint. "Take him," he commanded. It wasn't a request. It was the order of the Alpha King. The guards rushed forward, grabbing the screaming Lucian and dragging him away toward the cells, the same cells where he had kept Ricky chained in the dark. Gianna leaned against the marble pedestal, her legs finally giving out. She watched as Ricky climbed the stairs toward her. He didn't stop until he was in front of her. He reached out, his hand bloodied but gentle, and cupped her face. "You did it," he whispered, awe in his voice. "We did it," she corrected, leaning her forehead against his chest. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart, the heartbeat of the king she had saved, and the man who had saved her. Revolutions are rarely tidy affairs, and the weeks following the siege of Black River were a blur of frenetic energy. There were wounds to bind, ancient treaties to renegotiate, and a fractured community that needed to learn how to trust again. The transition of power wasn't just about signing documents. It was about scrubbing the stain of fear from the walls of the estate. 3 weeks later, the Vane estate, now officially reclaimed and christened Valco Manor, was unrecognizable. The oppressive gloom that had once clung to the stone facade was gone, replaced by the scent of pine boughs, roasting meat, and the crisp, clean air of a fresh start. The heavy iron gates, once barred to keep the world out, now stood open. Gianna Mercer stood alone on the high balcony of the master suite, overlooking the vast expanse of the forest that was now, improbably, her home. She smoothed the fabric of her gown, the midnight blue silk slipping through her fingers like water. Silver clips held her hair back, catching the light of the rising moon. She took a deep breath, trying to steady the flutter in her chest. She was an archivist. She was used to cataloging history, not making it. Yet, when she walked through the halls now, the wolves, men, and women who could tear a car door off its hinges stopped and bowed. They called her Luna with a reverence that still made her blush. A warmth radiated behind her, followed by the sensation of strong arms wrapping around her waist. Ricky pulled her back against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He smelled of cedar and rain, a grounding, earthy scent that instantly calmed her nerves. "You're overthinking," Ricky murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated against her spine. "I'm just thinking," she corrected, leaning back into his embrace, "about how different this view looks when you aren't running for your life through it." Ricky chuckled, the sound rich and free of the pain that had haunted him in the cellar. He turned her gently until she faced him. His electric blue eyes searched hers, filled with an intensity that made her knees weak. He looked regal tonight, his tuxedo sharp against his broad frame, but it was the softness in his gaze that captivated her. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Gianna smiled, reaching up to trace the faint line of a healed scar on his jaw. "The part where I nearly got electrocuted on a motel roof? Yes, I could have done without that. But the part where I ended up here, with you?" She shook her head. "No, no regret. You saved us, Gianna," Ricky said, his expression turning serious. "You didn't just break the physical chains. You broke the cycle of fear Lucian used to control this pack. You reminded them of who they were before the darkness took over." "I just used a pair of bolt cutters," she whispered, deflecting the praise as she always did. "No," Ricky insisted, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "You used your heart. You walked into the dark when anyone else would have run. That is what makes a queen." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Gianna's breath hitched. Ricky opened it. Inside sat a ring unlike any she had ever seen. It wasn't a diamond. It was a band of woven metals, dark, rugged, and beautiful. "Iron for strength," Ricky explained, sliding the ring onto her finger. "It was a perfect fit. Obsidian for the truth that set us free." He paused, his thumb brushing over a thin, gleaming strand woven through the black stone and silver. Gianna looked up, surprised. "Silver?" "To remind us," Ricky said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was the metal that burned me, the metal that held me captive, but you turned it into the key to my freedom. We wear it now to remind us that even the things that were meant to destroy us can be overcome." Tears pricked Gianna's eyes. It was a symbol of reclamation, He was taking back his power, and he was sharing it with her. "I love you, Ricky," she said, the words tumbling out with a certainty that shook her to her core. It was the first time she had said it out loud, but it felt like a truth that had existed for a lifetime. Ricky froze. The joy that washed over his face was brighter than the moon above, transforming his sharp features into something open and vulnerable. "And I," he whispered, leaning down to rest his forehead against hers, "am yours, body, blood, and soul, until the last star burns out." He kissed her, then a slow, searing promise of devotion that made the world around them fade away. "They are waiting for you," Gianna murmured against his lips as they finally broke apart. "They are waiting for us," Ricky corrected. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring, and together they walked to the edge of the balcony. Below, on the great lawn, the entire Blood River pack had gathered. Hundreds of faces turned upward in unison. The silence was absolute, a heavy, expectant hush. Then the clouds parted, and the full moon bathed the valley in silver light. When the pack saw their alpha standing tall, healed and whole, and the woman who had walked through fire to save him standing by his side, a sound began to rise. It started low, a rumble in the chests of the elders, and grew into a crescendo that shook the leaves on the trees. It wasn't a howl of war or of pain. It was a song of home. It was a declaration of loyalty that echoed off the mountains. Gianna Mercer, the historian who thought her life would be spent in the quiet dust of libraries, squeezed the hand of the Wolf King. She felt the vibration of the pack's song in her own bones, a primal call that woke something wild within her. She smiled, threw her head back, and for the first time, she closed her eyes and joined the howl. And that is how a simple act of kindness brought an empire to its knees and raised a new one from the ashes. Gianna proved that you don't need claws to be fierce, and Ricky showed that true strength isn't about dominance, but about devotion. They ruled the Blood River Pack for 60 years. A golden age written not just in history books, but in the hearts of their people. They say on quiet nights in the Pacific Northwest, if you listen closely to the wind, you can still hear the song of the alpha and the girl who broke his chains. Wow, what a journey. If you love this story of danger, destiny, and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I want to know, would you have dared to enter that cellar? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.